Hello and welcome to Penglis Online News. This is news from a conservative, libertarian perspective. All issues and topics covered will have that clear point of view. The goal of Penglis Online News, as always, is to inspire new ideas, to invent new terms, new definitions, and new language for you to use, to give you new ways of looking at and thinking about the news. Welcome now to Penglis Online News. This edition of Penglis Online News is a special report centering on the federal government's siege at the Cliven Bundy Ranch. This report is about how we got here, what does it all mean, what other issues are involved, and where are we headed in the future. To understand all this, we have to go through a brief history of the ownership of land. This history is from Land and Feudalism in Medieval England by Magistra Rosamond of Mercia. In ancient England, there were two land systems. The first tradition was under the Celts, where all land was held by the sword, meaning there was no established legal system to protect land ownership. The owners of land kept what they could defend by force. This is pretty much how the Bureau of Land Management operates today, with their SWAT teams, helicopters, snipers, and armed troops. The next system was under the Saxons, where land was tied to families. There was no superior power over the land, and no land was allowed to leave family possession. This is the tradition that Cliven Bundy and his family have called upon, having grazed the land for generations. The term for this system is folkland. Folkland was divided up into large counties and then subdivided into hundreds. The holder of folkland is a free landowner. The land was held by right or custom. Later land became held by charter or written document and was called bookland, and this is where the kings started to get involved in land ownership and control. After the Norman conquest of England in 1066, the system of feudalism was established. This was a social and economic system that combined German tradition, Roman law, and church law. Every person in feudalism was defined by their relationship with the land, because land was the source of wealth and power. William the Conqueror and all future kings claimed ownership of all the land of England. Everyone who had land of their own did so because of land grants from the king. This is the philosophy that the Obama administration operates under, where all power is centralized in a sovereign, all the people are subjects, and all the use of land is by grant of the man who would be king if he could, Barack Obama. The monarchs of England entered into agreements with the most important lords, particularly those with the greatest armies, and granted land to them in return for services to the crown. To see how this translates today, switch lords for cabinet and agency heads, vassals for regional directors, and mercenary knights for federal law enforcement agents. The federal government, therefore, is operating under a doctrine of feudalism. This is, of course, against our Constitution, our laws, our traditions, our view of private property, and our system of citizen supremacy over our servant government. This should have been resolved with the establishment of the Constitution, but sadly it is not. And that is where the conflict today comes from. Penglis Online News is brought to you by The Complete Guide to Flight Instruction, which is my sarcastic and blunt critique of our flight training system and how to fix it. Also, if you want to learn to fly, if you want all the secrets, all the inside information, all the things that will really get you through the flight training system efficiently, quickly, and with all kinds of information you're not going to get from any other source, please consult The Complete Guide to Flight Instruction, available from Amazon.com. To understand where government is usurping control and power of land they have no right to, consider these cases. First, the federal judiciary. In California, a federal court has ordered the regular diversion of millions of gallons of fresh water intended for Central Valley farmers and flushed them down the Sacramento Delta in an unproven action to allegedly protect the Delta smelt, a fish analogous to a pizza topping, with a 1-year life cycle, which is preyed upon by larger, non-native fish, regardless of the water diversion. This misguided ruling has contributed to abandoned farmland, higher food prices, and 40% unemployment in farm country. The Environmental Protection Agency has proposed changes to the Clean Water Act, which would give it authority over temporary wetlands and waterways. Louisiana Senator David Vitter has said, quote, "This may be one of the most significant private property grabs in U.S. history." And there is the Bureau of Land Management, who, after reclassifying some 600,000 acres of land, used hundreds of federal officers, cowboys, and helicopters to steal some 500 head of cattle from Cliven Bundy and the Bundy Ranch because he allegedly owed grazing fees. Snipers targeted the Bundy family, the BLM set up a, quote, First Amendment area, and attempts to document the siege with video and camera equipment were met with stormtrooper violence, tasing, and spying on anyone who challenged or documented the siege. The Bureau of Land Management, or BLM, is under the Department of the Interior, another agency not authorized by the Constitution. The BLM is charged with managing public land. In Commonwealth countries, this is defined as Crown land, again, going back to feudalism. Public land isn't public. It is instead held in trust for the American people by the federal government. The BLM and other agencies manage the land and collect fees for its use. If it were really public, there would be no fees, and the public would have free access to it. Congress is supposed to create public land through legislation. However, since 1906, presidents have annexed land by executive order under a misinterpretation of the Antiquities Act, which only authorizes the setting aside of land with prehistoric Native American ruins and artifacts. After the bogus executive orders, that land is handed over to agencies like the BLM. The BLM controls over 247 million acres of land, about 1/8 of the country, and over 700 million acres of subsurface mineral, gas, and oil rights land. In 2011, the BLM spent $1.5 billion, but took in $4 billion in collections. The incentive for this agency, then, is to acquire as much land as possible, generate as many collections as possible, increase its power and authority, and become better armed to enforce its will. The Constitution, however, is very clear on this subject. Article 1, Section 8, the delegated powers to the federal government, allows for exclusive federal jurisdiction only over the District of Columbia and like authority over places purchased in the states, with state legislative consent, only for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings. There is no delegated power for the purchasing, management, control, or revenue collection from public land. Because of the 10th Amendment, land within a state is the exclusive jurisdiction of that state. Sources for this story include Flash Report, a California political news source, Fox News, The Washington Times, The Las Vegas Review-Journal, Alex Jones' InfoWars, Wikipedia, the Cato Institute, The Natural News, and the Next Network News. In my special report on the Second Amendment, much time was spent detailing the change from bureaucracies to armed enforcement agencies, and the incentives of available surplus military equipment and asset forfeiture laws to boost agency armaments and budgets. The New Mexico Watchdog at watchdog.org has a partial list of armed federal agencies. Some of the most unlikely armed agencies include the Department of Education, the Bureau of Land Management, which has 200 rangers and 70 agents, the Department of the Interior, the Postal Inspection Service, which has 1,000 uniformed officers, the National Park Service, the Environmental Protection Agency with 200 agents, Fish and Wildlife with 224 agents, and even the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. The Weather Department has a law enforcement division. There are some 25,000 enforcement officers and agencies not associated with law enforcement. At the same time, the government is trying to disarm the citizenry. The definition of a police state is where the police have all the guns and the people do not, and those guns are used to enforce a dictatorship. InfoWars has documented the over 1 billion rounds of ammo secured recently by Homeland Security. And it's well known the president promised in his first campaign to build a domestic security force as big as the military. None of this is legal because the Constitution only gives federal jurisdiction over crime in 3 areas: piracy, counterfeiting, and treason. So, to comply with the law, all federal agencies not involved in those crimes would have to disarm and arrest themselves. Hardly a likely outcome. The feds are using every means to arm themselves and disarm the citizenry. Examiner.com reports that in late March in Bozeman, Montana, USA Brass, an ammunition brass case processor, was invaded by the EPA, the FBI, and other agencies to teach them a lesson for not being deferential enough during the initial visit by the Occupational Health and Safety Administration, OSHA, which was looking into compliance with environmental rules. The subsequent investigation of this raid is looking into whether fully automatic weapons were pointed at workers of USA Brass during the raid. Again, the feudal lords do the king's bidding. In December of 2013, the Appalachian Area News reported that the EPA was used to close the Herculaneum lead smelter in Missouri, the only lead smelter to produce lead bullion from raw lead ore, which means now that all lead for traditional ammunition will have to be imported, and only recycled lead can be domestically made into ammunition. The resulting price rise will limit access to ammunition. This smelter had been in operation since 1892, so the attack on citizens and our self-defense rights are a multi-front invasion by the feudal feds bent on supremacy. This event at the Bundy Ranch is the straw that broke the camel's back. For the first time, citizens, militia, new media journalists, cowboys, ranchers, and others made a stand and turned back a militarized government force, in this case, the Bureau of Land Management. It was done with superior numbers, and it was done without violence. Time will tell if there was an invasion of the Bundy Ranch planned for April 19th, the traditional day for government massacres like Waco. But for now, the citizens have enforced constitutional law over brute government force. This is a turning point in American history, the implications of which are only just beginning to be realized. The people are discovering their rightful power and rightful place over the government, and the government is discovering that they can't carry on their oppressive business as usual. Critical to this change is the new media, which completely outclassed and outreported the old guard government media. This new media is completely independent and doesn't go through any corporate or government censorship or political agenda. And that makes all the difference. The Washington Times and the Pulse of the Colorado Farm Bureau both report that a secret memo, never intended for publication, has been leaked by a patriotic official at the Department of the Interior to Utah Congressman Bob Bishop, who then made it public. It is Attachment 4, Prospective Conservation Designation, of a document titled States for Designation. The memo lists 17 sites in 11 states, totaling more than 10 million acres, that could be designated as national monuments, making them off-limits to ranchers, foresters, miners, and energy developers, by once again illegally misusing the Antiquities Act of 1906. The president could enact this by executive order, and it would stand, unless Congress or the Supreme Court did their sworn duty to overturn any further annexation by the executive. Previous presidents have abused their authority with the Antiquities Act, like when Jimmy Carter locked up 50 million acres of Alaska against the wishes of Alaska. Bill Clinton 22 times used his authority illegally to ban the use of 6 million acres, particularly in Utah, where producing domestic oil activities were halted. So once again, the land belongs to the Crown, and they will decide how the land is used, who gets to use it, and how we the people will be starved of energy, resources, recreation, and our own land. Welcome to modern feudalism. Senator Jim DeMint of South Carolina introduced an amendment to block any national monument designation of lands listed in the secret memo. The Democrats, under Harry Reid, senator for Nevada, where the Bundy Ranch is, rejected the amendment 58-38. For now, the feds own 650 million acres, or 29% of the nation's total land, and they want more. At the heart of the current controversy at the Bundy Ranch is Cliven Bundy, a 67-year-old rancher. In an interview with Glenn Beck for The Blaze, Bundy said, quote, "I do not recognize these lands to be federal. I am staking out my claim that the United States government does not have any jurisdiction and any rights to the land that I am now grazing on. It is Nevada land." Bundy argues that the feds did control Nevada when it was a territory. However, once the sovereign state of Nevada was created, all rights, powers, and titles were transferred to the state, and in Bundy's words, to "we the people of Clark County." Bundy continues, "At the moment of statehood, the people of the territory became the people of the United States with the Constitution." Bundy is a citizen of the county and the state of Nevada, which is why the state is supreme to the feds within the state, and why the feds have no jurisdiction or authority over grazing rights, water rights, access rights, ranch improvements, or anything else. And that is the heart of this conflict. Are we a nation of subjects under the king and all land belonging to the crown, or are we a nation of citizens, sovereign within our counties and states, and a small federal government with limited and specific powers delegated in our Constitution? And that is the question to be answered now and in the future. To respond to the federal feudal usurpation of land, the Salt Lake Tribune reports that the Western lawmakers gathered in Utah to discuss how to take back control of federal lands within their borders, recognizing that the feds will never do this willingly on their own, and that the feds are willing to use armed brute force to override constitutional law. More than 50 political leaders from 9 states, from county commissioners to state legislators, convened to talk about wresting control of oil, timber, and mineral-rich lands from the feds. The tide is turning in federal-state relations, and the states are beginning to reassert their rightful control of their state land. U.S. Senator Mike Lee also addressed the group. This summit was planned before the siege at Bundy Ranch. Most of the Crown land is in the West. However, if you combine energy and resource imprisonment by land, a massive federal national debt, invasion by illegal aliens, a shrinking workforce, and growing dependent population, the Western states are worried for the future. Utah is the leader in pushing the return of taken land back to the states. Utah Representative Ken Ivory sponsored House Bill 148, which was signed by Governor Gary Herbert 2 years ago, which demands that the feds make good on promises made in the 1894 Enabling Act of Utah, which made Utah a state, to extinguish title to federal lands in Utah. It hasn't happened. In my commentary today, this is how I see this going. The truth that states are realizing is that the feds will not honor their solemn promise and contract to relinquish title to former territories once they became states, and the states will conclude that if they want their land back, they are going to have to take it back. This could be with further legislation, state Supreme Court action, withholding tax revenue from the federal government, denying federal law enforcement action within state boundaries, or mobilizing the state National Guard. The people will rally with the states, and the militia will support and defend the Constitution as they are sworn to do. This is why we have a Second Amendment, and why the feudal king, vassals, and lords want to abolish even the thought or memory of the right to own and carry arms. If done properly, the feds will be forced to emerge from feudalism, give up control of the land they now exercise with brute military force and confiscatory taxes and fees, and return to their lawful jurisdiction of the continental borders and the District of Columbia. Then they can concentrate on actually enforcing the borders. All federal law enforcement agencies should be disarmed, and any action requiring the use of arms should be by state and local law enforcement only. The only exceptions to this is enforcing the crimes of piracy, counterfeiting, and treason. All current and prospective agents and law enforcement officers must be mandated to 3 months of constitutional sensitivity training at Hillsdale College. There they will be exposed, probably for the first time, to the real meaning of liberty and freedom, to our founding documents and papers, and the origin and source of individual rights and citizen sovereignty. They should be exposed to the horrors of government genocides through the ages, and the wanton barbarism of national secret police forces. They should witness the Nazi war crimes trials at Nuremberg to learn that, quote, following orders is no excuse for their illegal actions. Once they have been certified as constitutionally sensitive, they can return to duty or to law enforcement training. This should be done for all agency heads, cabinet secretaries, and any other federal employee desiring to understand their jobs and their place. I'd recommend this for the president, but it would be a waste of time as he would never understand. So, the struggle for land goes back to ancient times, even to the guys who built this thing behind me. The technology has changed, but human nature has not, and the desire for power, land, and wealth will always be with us. The question is, will they be earned or taken? This has been a special report of Penglis Online News. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel for more broadcasts of news from a conservative, libertarian perspective. This is Greg Penglis of Penglis Online News. Good day.